As a huge fan of Justice and Daft Punk, I've been chasing their sound for years. I've been obsessed with their complex style of chopping and processing. I never came close to their style until now. Now let's be real, I'm no Justice or Daft Punk. However, I finally found a way to get that much closer to the music of these two icons. Let's get into it. Inspiration, create mode. So I used Splice's create mode to find a set of sounds that I knew would work together. This was the biggest unlock for me. The ability to make a stack where all the sounds are tempo matched and in tune with each other is a game changer. Most of the Daft Punk samples came from the 70s, funk and disco, so I'm gonna pick Disco Fever. I deleted everything and started from scratch with guitars. The first stack really didn't do it for me, so I started again and immediately got magic. Every guitar I added was like, mwah. I exported the stack as a live session and started adjusting the pitch. Most samples were adjusted in the same amount of steps, except for this muted guitar. I really felt like it sounded better pitched up. Bass. Okay, so having sorted the guitars, I realized I'm gonna need some bass. I went back to create and I chose Disco Fever again. I started deleting layers since all I wanted was bass guitars, but I stopped at the drums because the drums were perfect. This stack handed me a gift by giving me the perfect drum loop. This is part of the magic of Create, in my opinion. I get inspiring results in a short amount of time. Once I got the layers of bass, I exported these as stems so that I could drag the files with their matching pitch into the original session. This is where the tedious prep begins. I needed to get the bass samples in key with the guitars. For this to work, I couldn't just rely on changing the pitch the same amount for each sample. I had to use my ear and adjust some up and some down until it all made sense together. And now's the next tedious part of the process, but this part is probably the most rewarding. Chopping. With the full guitar and bass loops laid out, I started experimenting by chopping various parts of the samples. It's pretty random at first. I just grab parts that sound interesting on their own and isolate them. Then I randomly space them out on the timeline. It was super helpful to have that drum loop from the bass stack because I was instantly able to gauge whether it worked for the groove or not. I decided to chop that up as well. Once I laid out a few pieces of the guitar samples, I started to get an idea of what I wanted to hear. All of a sudden, I knew I wanted to hear this muted guitar pitch down. I just heard it in my head. I thought it might be cool to grab this section of these long distorted chords and pitch it way up. I wanted to find more samples to complement the sounds I had so far, so I loaded up Bridge, set my key, and started browsing with the desktop app. I found some dope choir sounds which I chopped up and slotted around the guitars. This one's from Test Press. This other one's from Dope Boys Music. Mixing. So sound selection is a huge part of this process, but there are little adjustments to the sound that make a world of difference. When I think of Justice, I think of how much rock and roll they brought to the Cross album. I wanted to convey that by running some samples through the stock amp effect in Live. I grouped the guitars and also ran them through Live's drum bus because it's not just for drums. I followed this up with Devious Machine's Texture. This helped add that addictive noise you hear when sampling from vinyl or old cassettes. I felt it was important to layer the drum loop with more drums. I chose the 707 as it seems to be prevalent sound throughout Justice songs. This gave a huge boost to the drums. I did a slight EQ dip and added some processing with Live's drum bus. I grouped the bass and gave it a heavy amount of processing using Live's Redux to give it the feel of the old samplers Daft Punk might use. Then I followed up with Arturia's Cold Fire, which added a crazy amount of beefiness. Another critical part of the groove is sidechain. All of the instruments are grouped and run through a compressor being fed a kick as its sidechain signal. This means that every time the kick hits, the music ducks out of the way. However, this kick isn't heard at all. It's a ghost kick. I'm simply using it to trigger the sidechain and give a slight pumping effect. Finally, the master bus is Live's glue stock compressor for, well, glue, T-Rack's Tape Machine 440 for a vintage finish, and then pushed into T-Rack's brick wall limiter. I was very much inspired by Justice's heavy-handed processing. Traditional mixing rules will prevent you from overprocessing, but I love the bold sound of these records. So I say screw the rules and make the music do whatever your ears want to hear. Arrangement. Lastly, I went through and moved things around here and there. I added some extra excitement with drum slams, automation, and pitch changes of slices. I I just asked myself, what would make me want to listen to this over and over again? And that's it. Splice's create mode unlocked the ability to find matching samples quickly. It took me about 5 minutes to find the inspiration I needed via Stacks, but the real work happens in the DAW, experimenting, chopping, processing, and arranging. So what about you? What would you do differently? Let me know in the comments. Peace.